Hi, my name is Steve Delberth. I'm the New York State Wrestling Rules Interpreter for high school wrestling. And the purpose of this video tonight is to discuss the rules as they relate to the out-of-bounds situations. And before I start, I want to put out a couple disclaimers. First, this video is being recorded in the year 2021 for the upcoming season. So it will be accurate for 2021 and 2022. If this gets downloaded to some other platform and you're watching this 20 years from now, I'm pretty confident that what I'm about to tell you will no longer be accurate due to rules modifications. But for the upcoming season, everything will be accurate and will be predominantly based on NFHS rules with a little slight twist here and there that may deviate slightly. And when I get to those parts in the meeting, I'll explain to you which areas are in which we're deviating, number one, and number two, why. Okay, that's the first disclaimer. The second one is that I am a New York State rules interpreter. So some of the things I'm saying, it may not be accurate in your state. So if you see something on here that you disagree with or that your interpreter doesn't agree with, that's their prerogative. Thing is that this is put together so that we can create some consistency, at least within the New York State area, so that our officials all have the same set of guidelines to follow when determining whether or not a wrestler is still in bounds. You know, any discussion of the out-of-bounds rule would require me to go back and just briefly touch on the history of this rule. When I first started reffing 45 years ago, for the first 40 years of that experience, there were very specific things that we looked for in determining whether a wrestler was out of bounds. And all we had to do is look at their body and where their body parts were during any portion of the match. And as soon as we identified that one of those parts were out of each wrestler, they were out. So as you were watching them in the neutral position, you'd see one wrestler step out with his left foot, and it only had to be a portion of the left foot. It didn't even have to become the whole foot out of bounds, just any portion of the foot out of bounds. Now we're looking at the other wrestler's foot, and as soon as that foot touched out of bounds, tweet, we blew the whistle, put him out of bounds, brought him back to the center. That was when they were determined to be out of bounds. But with this new rule that was implemented probably 5 years ago, our philosophy has completely changed. Now we're looking at the wrestlers, whatever position they're in, we're determining in that position, what are we considering to be the supporting points? And once we determine that, we'll let wrestling continue as long as there are two supporting parts still in bounds. Now those two supporting points could be two supporting parts of one wrestler or one supporting point of each wrestler. And so in a few minutes I'm going to take you in the gym and I'm going to take a couple varsity wrestlers and I'll put them in various positions and then we'll show you when they're in and when they're out and the reasons why. You know, the rule book says that when the wrestlers are on their feet, we assume that their supporting points are going to be their 2 feet, of course, and also there's the potential for one of their supporting parts to be the hands. You know, if they're standing up and they got weight on both feet and weight on a hand or hands, we're considering the hands to be supporting points. But when they go down on the mat, the usual points of support are the hips, knees, side of the thigh, buttocks, head, and hands. And so we look for those to be our supporting points, but we also have information in the rule that says when the defensive wrestler is on their back, the shoulders and scapula become their supporting points. And in that position, any part of the shoulders or scapula become all of the supporting points. So when we get out there in the gym, I'm going to show you what I mean by that and how the match can be affected by this. Now, this new rule, or this rule that's relatively new, it has cut down the number of match stoppages by far and has increased the amount of scoring that occurs on the edge of the mat. So I think it's going in a great direction. Any of you fans or referees out there that have been staunch proponents of the college wrestling rule, it's impossible for us to implement that rule at the high school level due to the fact that oftentimes in high school venues there isn't adequate space. The other thing is when we get out into the gym, we're going to discuss when they're in and when they're out, but I'm going to have to do that based on the assumption that the mat that they're wrestling on can accommodate the action, you know, on the edge of the mat, and that they're in a place in the mat that can accommodate this additional action. If they're ever in a place on the mat where there's a limited safety area so that one of the wrestlers touches the floor, we are obligated to stop the match as soon as they touch the floor. And so we're going to try to shoot this in the corner of the mat where we can assume that the action would have continued and that there would be no stoppage. If there were a case where a wrestler was touching the floor or was getting perilously close to hitting the floor, even if the criteria for being in bounds was still being met, we're going to stop the match, because obviously the number one issue with refereeing is to keep the wrestler safe, and so we can't just have them tumbling down onto the floor. So let's take a trip into the gym now, and we'll have a couple wrestlers do a little video for you, and I'll see you in there. Okay. Well, good morning. Here we are in Greenwood, South Carolina. We're in the Greenwood High School gym with two of my wrestlers, Andrew Perkins, Kason Howell, and behind the camera is the famous Doug Crowder, where we keep him behind the camera because he's not very pretty. Okay, and so we're gonna do some demonstrations right here on this line, and I'm gonna put the wrestlers in some various positions and explain to you when they're in and when they're out, and why we reach that conclusion. First of all, from a neutral position, you're gonna have, remember, you got to have two supporting parts in. That could be two supporting parts of one wrestler or one supporting part of each wrestler. So in a case like this, where they're head to head and you got 2 feet in and 2 feet out, the referee's looking at this. We can still wrestle. He's got two supporting points in. Now, as they start to rotate, boom, right there. We're still good. Now we have one supporting part of each wrestler in bounds. Now, as this wrestler moves to his right and his foot comes out, now you have only one supporting point in. But interestingly, unlike the years past where the entire supporting point had to be in bounds, if Andrew keeps a foot on that line, any part of the supporting point that's on the line or inside the line is still considered to be all the supporting part in. And that's illustrated in your rule book under illustration number 11. If you look at the footprints on there, it indicates that that's the case. Whereas in years past, all of the supporting part had to be in bounds. Now it's no longer necessary. So in this position, these wrestlers are still in bounds. Now, let's take a position where one guy is completely out and his hands go to the mat. Go to the mat, Andrew. Come around behind him. In this position here, wrestling could still continue because the defensive wrestler's supporting points are his two hands. If he were to drop to a knee now, drop to two knees, keep him outside the line, and picked up one of his hands, whoop, now we only have one supporting point in bounds. So these are his supporting points in this position. For years, it wasn't the case. We were always going with the knees. Now, as he goes to belly down to stay in that same position, both wrestlers have what appears to be their supporting points out of bounds. His hands aren't on the mat, but his elbows are. His elbows are his supporting points. The rule book says that down on the mat, and that means when the wrestlers are down on the mat as opposed to being in a standing position, the usual points of support are the hips, knees, side of the thigh, buttocks, head, and hands. But the unusual supporting parts could be other body parts, such as the elbows, as we are illustrating in this position. Also, we typically are not allowed to call the supporting points the part of the wrestler that's holding his opponent. So there's going to be times when this wrestler may have an elbow down on the mat, but it's one of the things with which he's holding his opponent. In that instance, we're going to defer to probably his knees or his hips or side of the thigh in that position. Okay, come back up. And pause the camera, please. Okay. Again, when down on the mat, the supporting points of the wrestler are going to be those parts that are inside, touching the mat, inside the 28-foot circle. There are two exceptions to having to touch the mat. One of them is, I'll explain to you in some detail, which is that when the shoulders and scapula become the supporting points, in which case they can be on the mat or above the mat, or if we have the wrestler who only has his feet in bounds, in those instances, the feet will not be the supporting points, it will be the knees, and that will be true whether they're on the mat or above the mat. So in those two instances, we consider the 28-foot circle to be a cylinder. Even though the National Federation High School Rules doesn't use the term cylinder, it is used at the college level in their rule book several times, and in these two instances, the rule it actually, by default, creates a cylinder because they're telling me whether they're on the mat or above the mat, they are the supporting points. And so by definition, that has to be treated as a cylinder. So now we look at these positions. These guys are out there wrestling. All I have to do as an official now is keep watching to see when are they no longer two supports in. And as they travel forward, slowly travel, right now, at this point here, because his knee is, I can see a little bit of the black here, his knee is out. All I have left in is one supporting point. If before that had happened, if Andrew had come to the side and got his knee back in, right there, we still can wrestle. And again, don't forget that I'm basing these interpretations on the assumption that this part of the mat is large enough to accommodate this kind of action.
Jason.
If this particular action was to be created over here, it's very likely that I would be stopping the match for an out of bounds, even if the out of bounds criteria hasn't been met yet, because their number one priority has got to be safety. If there's a potential for them to hit the floor, or there's a hazardous condition, I'm going to stop the match, even though technically and legally they're still in bounds, because your number one priority is to keep them safe. Okay, now we're going to take the front headlock. There you go, side headlock. We'll take a side headlock right here. Scoop this up, scoop the head up, right here. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, when the defensive wrestler is on their back, their shoulders and scapula become their supporting parts. And in this position, any part of the shoulder and scapula become all of their supporting points. In New York, our definition of on your back is when the shoulders break 90 degrees. Once those shoulders break 90 degrees, he's belly down, his hips, knees, head, hands, all those things are considered supporting points. But once he breaks 90 degrees, that all goes away and everything goes to the shoulders and scapula. Whether they're on the mat or above the mat, shoulders and scapula are his supporting points. So, in this position, it's not an issue. The offensive guy here that's in control has got control and his hips are in. Now, as they travel, slide this way. I'm still watching. His hips cross. Whoops, we're still in. Even though the weight is being supported on those 2 feet, in this particular instance, the knees are the supporting points, even though they're above the mat. So as they travel, as a referee, as they travel that way, I'm watching. Now, the moment that these 2 knees cross the cylinder, I have an out-of-bounds situation. Because there's no longer 2 supporting points in. And as I'm watching for this to occur, I have to position myself in a way so that I can observe the pin as well as the position of the offensive wrestler. So I'm going to be over here watching for the pin under here, and at the same time in my peripheral vision, I'll take momentary glances, and when I go, okay, a little more, whoop, right there. Now I know I got to stop it. And it takes a great deal of concentration to not only recognize, but to be able to go back and forth from the pin to the knee, from the pin to the knee. And I think that a competent official could be able to do that. So that's a skill that we need to try to work on and develop to become more proficient. Now we're going to take this same exact position, we're going to reverse it 180 degrees. All that will be in is case in the back. So while we're wrestling, he's got this headlock in. We just talked about this. Right now, Kaysen has his shoulders and scapula in. That means he's in. Now as they scoot this way, they scoot, he's still in, stop. Okay. Now, just take everything, take your foot out. Okay, good. In this position right here, guys, let's turn 180 degrees so that the camera can pick this up more clearly, okay? Come around this way. In other words, no, I got it. Stay here. Stay here. Come around this way, Andrew. Put the headlock on.
The other side.
Right here.
The other side.
There you go. Yep, scoop the head. Okay. Now you move everything that way. Shoot, that didn't help anything.
All right. Spin. Andrew.
Yeah.
Get to the other side and do it here.
Come on.
There you go.
There you go. That was my fault. I just want to be able to illustrate the shoulder here.
Sure.
Good. All right, now. Here's a case where we're using the cylinder. He's completely out of bounds. Kaysen's almost completely out of bounds. However, some of this scapula right here is this far inside the cylinder. Wrestling can continue here. You could earn near fall points, Andrew. You could get a pin here, and I'm not stopping the match.
Hold that position. Oh, well, it probably would, but I'd probably screw it up.
Okay. Okay?
Yep.
All right, so here we go. I'm going to move his hands momentarily so you can see the position. As a referee, number one, I'm making sure his feet aren't on the floor. If his feet touch the floor, by rule, I have to stop the match. But in this instance, there's plenty of mat area, and so as I'm watching these scapula, they're still within the cylinder. I can allow for this match to continue. All right? So, you could get a fall here, or you could get near fall points here. One of the reasons, this is the main reason, why I don't require in New York State for this wrestler to have contact with the mat, with the part that's in bounds, is because from this position here, if we took that literally and said the parts of the body that are the scapula and shoulders have to be touching the mat, every time he went into a high bridge on his head and his feet, I would have to say, okay, now his supporting points are his head and his foot. And then he comes back down. Now they're his shoulders. Back up. Now that would be absurd. I'm not going to put my referees in that position. So what I'm saying is once they break 90, all I have to do is concentrate on the shoulders and scapula. And as they go up and down, I can still consider those to be the supporting points. And another example would be this. He's touching, so there's supporting parts. He goes like this. Now they're not touching. Now they're not touching, but they're still in. We're still good. Because that's going to happen on a continuous basis. They're going to come up and down and up and down. And I don't think that we need to take the rule that literally in these conditions. So as long as this part of the shoulder or scapula are inside that 28-foot circle, we're going to continue to wrestle. Okay, guys, get me in a Peterson position. We are in a Peterson position. You'll see that the offensive wrestler now is in the white singlet. This wrestler is now capable of being pinned because wrestling's going to continue. But as he keeps his shoulders off the mat and they continue to slide toward the boundary line, keep sliding backwards, Andrew. Slide backwards, slide. I'm watching for supporting points. Stop. In this position right here, his supporting points cannot be his feet. The rule book tells us that when the defensive wrestler is on their back and the offensive wrestler, when he's on his back completely out of bounds and the offensive wrestler has his weight supported on the feet, we will not consider the feet to be the supporting points. And I'll take that a step further in a moment. But at this point right here, his feet can't be the supporting points. We'll use the knees. So he's completely out of bounds. He doesn't have any supporting points in, even though you're going to look at this and go, well, his 2 feet are in. But we just talked about that. His shoulders and scapula are his supporting points here, not his feet. And in this position, it's not his feet either because they're down on the mat extended. Therefore, when his butt came out and this knee crossed the cylinder, because right now, there's the cylinder, his knee's outside. All he has left in is one knee. I have to stop the match here. If he were able to have kept his knee here, we'd be good. Because now it's inside that cylinder that's been created by the outside of this line. So we're not considering the feet, we're considering the knees. As the knee goes here, that's when we have to call them out of bounds. Because right now, all he has in, although, go a little bit further, now he's out. As long as a little bit of that butt was on the line, we would have 2 things in. We would have the knee and the butt. So I'm looking here, he's out. Now, if he comes to this way, now he's got part of his buttocks in and his knee, so we'd still be good to go here. And again, you need to position yourself as a referee to be able to see that, recognize that that's the position that they're in, and still be able to call a fall should it occur. Okay, pause that a minute. Position here, they're wrestling on the mat. He's got double underhooks in. This guy hasn't got control yet. We're still waiting for control. Then all of a sudden, Kaysen, you slide your knees right up in between him so that his elevators are gone. Now his elevators are gone. Stop. At this point, the referee is saying, okay, there's a takedown right there. And wrestling can continue because right now, Kaysen has both knees inside the circle. Now, as this guy travels backwards, and by the way, he's in near fall criteria. I need to be counting right now. So when they hit this position and I'm awarding the 2 points, I'm going to say it loudly enough so that he knows. 2, 1, 2. And I'm going to count those near falls so that he knows I'm in trouble. I'm going to belly out or what have you. But this guy's going to continue to wrestle. And as his 2 knees cross outside the boundary line, as he moves, one's out, the other one's out. Now they're out. Stop. Now I have to stop the match because even though his toes are in, when they're down on the mat, we're not going to consider these toes to be the supporting parts. Very good. Okay, now come back into the mat. We'll do the same position, only this time he's got a body lock on you. Okay, so here's another example. He's in here. This guy was splitting the legs. This guy's got a tough body lock. However, he no longer has the ability to elevate. Therefore, the referee's going to go 2. Now, they're still in bounds. Clearly, they're still in bounds. As this wrestler jumps to the side and throws a Navy ride in, go the other way so you can see it. There you go. Now, he scoops under this leg here, under this leg. And he lifts. Now, I'm watching as a referee. I'm watching his back is down. Broke 90. 2. He broke 90. His sporting parts are right here. I'm going to get right here, and I can see now his shoulder blades and his scapula, and I can also see the 2 knees of the offensive wrestler. And as he proceeds to wrestle, when that right knee crosses, right there, at this point, I have to stop the match because he now only has one supporting part in. That's his knee. This foot is inconsequential to me, and this guy's feet are inconsequential to me because in this position, it's his shoulder and scapula. Okay, now come back and go referee's position right here. One guy completely out in referee's position, facing this way. We just talked right there. They go from a standing position and they land on the mat right here. On this side, you can't see it with the camera, but his knee is out. So they went from a rear standing position, neutral. He got in a rear standing position. He drove his opponent to the mat. And in this position, his knee hits and he's out of bounds. Had they hit the mat and both knees remained in, okay, so boom, like that, not only would he be awarded the points for the takedown, we would still be wrestling. In the case that I just showed you, where his knee lands out of bounds, go ahead and put your right knee back out of bounds, Kaysen. Boom, right now his right knees, they went from a rear standing position inside the circle. He finishes the move right here, and as they hit, he's got control. The referee in this position has got to stop the match and call it an out of bounds. However, it's still a toes in takedown because both of his feet are still in. So by definition, they're out of bounds because the supporting points, which are the knees, one of them is across the line. He only has one supporting point in. Therefore, the referee's going to go 2, out of bounds, and go back to the center. This is a classic toes in situation. And if anybody wants to make the argument that the toes in this position should be considered the supporting points and that wrestling should be allowed to continue, I would make the argument that if that's the case, why is there a toes in rule to begin with? Not every time this guy hits the mat, and if the toes were the supporting points, we would be allowing wrestling to continue and very likely continue far too far out into the safety area here. Okay? Thank you. Now, one of the reasons, relax a minute, guys. One of the reasons that the National Federation, lay on your back, please. One of the reasons that they made this call that they were going to use the knees was because they didn't want, in this position, with the defensive wrestler on their back, for wrestling to be allowed to continue way out here. Go ahead. Way out here. If we did use the feet, these guys would still be wrestling, and that was going to probably put them in a hazardous position relative to the gym floor. So, as I read this in the rule book, it says, when the defensive wrestler's on their back, the offensive wrestler's still in bounds, wrestling will continue here until the knees cross. Well, the rationale from the safety committee and the rules committee was that they didn't want the wrestlers to become so extended that they wrestled in this position and allowed the feet to be the supporting points. So that's what I'm saying to you is, when they're down on the mat, it's going to be very unusual for the feet to be considered the supporting points, even though there are a couple of positions where they could be. So here, my knees have to be in. It's not my feet, right? You know that. But if I were to land from a neutral position to here, I could have the 2-point takedown, but I still have to call out of bounds. All right. Pause that. Wrestler's on their back, and this wrestler keeps his knees in, they're still in. But when the knees cross, they're out. And the reason for that was, as I just mentioned, we don't want these wrestlers extended way out. But I don't think it's necessary for them to be in just as much danger, even if this wrestler's not on their back, but maybe belly down. Go ahead and belly down for a second. And in fact, go front headlock, and you're parallel with one another. If they were in this position here, come all the way around. Stay still, guys. Here we are. He's in by rule. And there's nothing in the rule book that says I can call out of bounds here. But I'm telling you, the rationale from the safety committee was that they didn't want wrestlers extended out on the mat in these positions due to the hazard of potentially being on the floor or hitting some other obstacle in the gym, such as a clock, a coach's chair, a cheerleader, what have you. So even though the knees are still in, they don't want the feet to be the support. So as you go ahead, keep going toward the wall. Right there. Now I got to stop it. I cannot consider the feet to be a supporting point there. All right, thank you guys. Let's get up a minute. Now there are times when I will consider the feet to be the supporting points, and I have this listed in our New York State Green Book, and it's when the feet are used in a position normally associated with standing. So as the wrestler's here, and he has a knee in and a hand in. If the wrestler then now imagine, go ahead and get on me a second, Andrew. This out of bounds. We're in bounds here because I have a knee and a hand in bounds. Now, as I go here, that's a position normally associated with a person attempting to stand up. And we're not extended out on the mat. We're not in jeopardy of going out into the no man's land. In that instance, that could be my supporting point. This can be considered a supporting point, as opposed to if we were extended way out like this, in which case it would not be my supporting point. Okay, so anytime they're using the foot in a position that's associated with standing, which would be like, if they go here, that could be the supporting point. Go ahead, get down on your referee's position. If this guy happens to be here, okay, that's a foot. Now when this hand's here, we still have two things in. We still have two things in, okay? Because in this position, I'm using my foot in a position normally associated with standing. All right, very good. Thank you. Here we have a classic cradle position on the edge of the mat. Right now, the wrestler in the black singlet, Kaysen has his butt in, he's got his knee in, he's good to go here. He's wrestling around, and as they slide out toward the boundary line, I'm watching, and he's just now, his knee, his first knee was already out. His second knee just went outside the parameters of this invisible cylinder. All that he has left in bounds now that can be considered a supporting point are the hips or the side of the thigh. Therefore, they're out of bounds here. Now, if Kaysen was able to just simply keep this leg here so that the knee stayed inside the cylinder, we're going to go to work here. So as a referee, I need to be cognizant of the fact that A, is he still pinned? B, when does he no longer have two supporting points in? C, is there anything going on over here that I need to be made aware of, like face gouging, grabbing the headgear, this guy doing something unnecessarily rough? Has the legal hold become illegal? And those are all things that you need to be cognizant of as you're officiating. So I'm probably going to come here and look for the fall, and then keep glancing up and hit. Go ahead, cross your knee out. As I'm looking for this pin, and you don't pin yourself. As I look up, now I see the knee out. Now maybe it was out there for 2 seconds, but I can only be in two places or one place at once. So I'm going to stop the match at that point. Okay, good. Now keep in mind that if there's no action at all at the edge of the mat, and criteria for going out of bounds has not been met, the referee has the authority to stop the match and bring them back to the center. So in the case where they're just hanging out over here, but out of bounds hasn't been accomplished, neither wrestler's gone out, or one wrestler's gone out, but there's still two supporting points in, the referee has the authority, in fact the duty, to stop that lack of action, get them back to the center, and we'll go to work from there. Already established himself as the offensive wrestler, so we're watching to see. He's broken 90 degrees here, so he's on his back. We're good for that. Now he goes into this cradle and he goes into a high tripod. Whoop, right there. Stop. This guy is pinned flat as a pancake. This guy's knees are still inside the circle. I'm watching both of those things at once here. This scapula is still up a little bit, and all of a sudden I look up and Kaysen, the black singlets, his right knee has crossed the cylinder. They're out of bounds. All right, so it's incumbent on this wrestler here, if they want wrestling to continue, is to keep that knee inside the circle. So you've got to suck it back. Both knees. You see what you just did? You put your knee down, and so at that moment when your knee came down on this side, you only had one thing in. All right, so get back up there like you were. Okay, now as your knees cross before they cross the line, you make sure you keep those in. See what I mean? All right, so that way the referee doesn't have to stop the match. And guess what? You got a pin here. So there we go. As I've watched referees refereeing around the country, it's apparent to me that there are some guys that just watch wrestling and they call out of bounds whenever they feel like it, without putting into play any of this information that I've just given you. I think that the out of bounds in wrestling should be treated with the same seriousness that's treated on other sports. You know, you'll see guys breaking down a football play in slow motion to see if those toes landed on the mat, or excuse me, on the mat, whether those toes landed on the field inside the line. And they scrutinize those plays very carefully. Well, as referees, we should at least attempt to become as consistent and as thorough as they do in other sports, baseball, football, etc., and make sure that we're not just arbitrarily calling out of bounds whenever we feel like it. Now, I say that with the following cautionary statement. There will be times, many, many times, that you're going to have to call it early because of the boundary lines aren't adequate enough to allow for the type of action that you're seeing. But in those cases where it can be allowed, why would we stop the match prematurely? Or more importantly, why would I allow a wrestler to get pinned while the defensive wrestler is out of bounds, but the offensive wrestler is also out of bounds? And I've seen too many times where the only thing left in bounds were a couple of toes, and yet the referee slapped the mat, and that was not the correct call. That match should have been interrupted. So the referees that say, I'll decide when they're out of bounds and that kind of thing, that's unprofessional. You should try to avoid that attitude and try to call out of bounds when it exists, when you can. Now a second thing that comes up is, if ever a wrestler goes out of bounds and a body part touches the floor, whether it's a toes in rule or they're extended out on the mat and something touches the floor, we have to stop the match by rule if some body part touches the floor. In New York, however, if a wrestler hits a takedown at the edge of the mat and a part of the defensive guy that's defending the takedown happens to touch the floor, we're going to stop the match and call out of bounds. However, if the touching of that floor was inconsequential to the takedown, we can still award the takedown. We won't disallow it. There are too many times when a guy will hit a beautiful hip toss here at the edge of the mat. He hits the hip toss, and they land in a position where they're out of bounds, right here. And the other wrestler's foot comes over the top, and boop, he places his toe, and it hits the floor. Well, the touching of that floor with that foot in no way put him at a disadvantage. The rule says if a wrestler is handicapped by having any portion of his body out of bounds, that no points will be scored. But in that instance, I would argue that he's not handicapped in any way. They simply ran out of mat, and that's why I'm stopping the match. But I will also allow you to give the points there that were earned by the person who initiated the move while they were still in bounds. That being said, however, if a wrestler runs into something other than just touching the floor innocently, if you will, we have to stop the match. Here's an example. While wrestling, a maneuver is attempted and they bump into the chairs that the coaches are sitting in. They bump into some casual spectator who happened to be walking across the mat where they shouldn't be. They bump into the referee, for example. Where they bump into the referee in such a way that it could potentially impact their ability to attack or defend. We have to stop the match under those circumstances. I once saw a match where a kid hit a blast double. He hit the blast double, and he drove him right into the official. The official ended up out of bounds on his butt, one wrestler in his lap, the other wrestler in between his legs, and awarded a 2-point takedown. That's just patently unfair. There's no way that I would allow for that to happen, because the impact of the official definitely had some ability to inhibit this guy's ability to defend the position. So I would say, my bad, I was out of position, I got in the way, I apologize, we're going neutral. You can't allow you to impact the match in that way. Of course, there will be times when the guy's on his back getting pinned and they touch you in the head or something, which probably means you're too close. But there are going to be times when you touch the wrestlers to tell them to get off the head, get out of the eyes. You're going to touch them. But if you touch them in such a way that you impact their ability to attack or defend, you need to stop the match at that point and not allow it to continue further. All right, well, I hope this video has been helpful for you guys in New York. We'll try to implement these techniques across the state so that all sections are calling it the same as much as possible. And maybe it'll help coaches to understand what we're looking for, because I know that coaches and spectators oftentimes look at this and go, I don't understand the out-of-bounds rule at all. And frankly, you're not alone. There's a lot of people that don't understand it, and so this video may help in that regard. Later this month, I'll be coming out with another video that talks about stalling in the neutral position when the wrestler backs completely out of bounds, the differences between unsportsmanlike conduct and misconduct, and some other pertinent topics that I think are going to be of interest to the state officials in New York. Thank you, guys. And guys, thank you. Appreciate your help. All right. We got her, Coach?
It was a little gangly on that last part, but everything.